The sky had always been a canvas of stars, but tonight, it was different. Tonight, the stars weren't just distant lights in the sky, they were the marks of a battle that was about to unfold. Earth had always been a peaceful place, untouched by the threats of the universe, but that was about to change. "They're here," whispered Captain Quinn as he peered through the glass of the command ship. The elite hunters had arrived. For centuries, the human race had been the quiet observers in the grand cosmos. They had watched alien civilizations rise and fall, each playing their role in the universe. But Earth had never faced the brunt of intergalactic threats. That is, until now. A fleet of sleek, dark ships hovered silently over the barren landscapes. Their designs were a testament to their creator's precision, built for one purpose: hunting. These were not mere predators, but the most fearsome beings from distant worlds, hunters trained to eliminate any threat, no matter how subtle, how silent. "They won't know what hit them," Captain Quinn muttered under his breath, his voice a mix of arrogance and confidence. He had led these hunters for decades, traversing galaxies, bringing down creatures far more dangerous than anything Earth could imagine. But even Quinn's stone-cold demeanor couldn't mask the hint of uncertainty that fluttered in his chest. There was something about Earth that felt different. It wasn't the landscapes or the air, it was the unspoken tension that seemed to cling to every living thing. The unknown. For the elite hunters, Earth was just another mission. The creatures they hunted were always fast, always elusive. But this mission felt personal. Something about the way the planet pulsed with life made the hairs on the back of Quinn's neck stand up. It was almost as if the Earth itself was aware of their presence. The hunters disembarked onto the planet's surface, their boots making no sound on the soil. They were armed with advanced weapons, tech that could track even the faintest of heartbeats or the smallest of movements. Their prey had no chance. But as the elite hunters began their search, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It wasn't a visual presence, no one was following them, no eyes were glaring from the shadows. It was more subtle. The sensation that something was there, just beyond their reach. "Captain, we've found nothing," one of the hunters, Mara, said, her voice crackling through Quinn's calm. "No signs, no traces. It's like they've vanished." Quinn clenched his fists. This was supposed to be easy. Too easy. There was no reason they should be having trouble finding the threat. He scanned the horizon, the deep red of the setting sun casting long shadows over the landscape. "Keep searching," he ordered, though his voice held a touch of frustration. "This is no ordinary enemy. Stay sharp." As the team moved deeper into the dense forest, Quinn's mind raced. The planet was quiet, too quiet. He had read the reports. This planet was inhabited by primitive species, creatures barely capable of defending themselves. Yet, there was something unsettling about the silence. The hunters began to spread out, using their advanced technology to scan for anything unusual. But the deeper they ventured, the more they began to notice something: their equipment wasn't working as it should. The scanners were glitching, their tracking devices were failing. Even their communication systems had intermittent lapses. "Something's not right," Quinn muttered to himself, his fingers drumming nervously on the console. The tech was flawless, nothing should be malfunctioning. And then, the first sign appeared. A shadow, flickering just at the edge of their vision. At first, it was so subtle, so small, that Quinn thought it was just a trick of the light. But then it moved again. A cold chill ran through Quinn's spine. "Everyone, fall back to the rendezvous point. Now!" Quinn barked, his voice low and urgent. They hadn't seen anything yet, but they all felt it. The enemy was here, and it was watching. Unseen. Unheard. And it was waiting. As the elite hunters retreated to their rendezvous point, the dense forest around them seemed to close in. The air was thick with tension, every crackling twig and rustling leaf amplifying the unsettling silence. No one spoke as they moved, their once confident footsteps now cautious, almost hesitant. The feeling of being watched had only grown stronger, as if something, or someone, was moving just out of sight, always one step ahead. "Something's out there," Mara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I feel it too." Quinn, leading the group, said nothing but kept his senses sharp. His military training had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, every fiber of his being was screaming that they weren't alone. His eyes darted around the shadowy trees, but they revealed nothing, no signs of movement, no indicators of life. The silence was oppressive. Even the usual chirps of wildlife that filled the air had ceased. It was as though the planet itself was holding its breath. "Stay close," Quinn ordered, his voice steady despite the rising unease in his chest. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together. We've trained for this." But even his words felt hollow. He could see it in the eyes of his team, they were on edge. The elite hunters, accustomed to facing the deadliest creatures in the galaxy, were now unnerved by the unseen force that seemed to encircle them. Minutes dragged by as they moved carefully through the forest. The trees stretched high above them, their dense canopies blocking out the sun, casting them into an eerie twilight. The air felt colder now, biting at their exposed skin, and still, there was no sign of the enemy. But Quinn couldn't shake the feeling that something was moving, circling them like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. As they reached a clearing, the faintest sound broke through the stillness, a soft, almost imperceptible rustle from the underbrush. Before anyone could react, a blur of movement darted through the trees. It was fast, too fast. One of the hunters, Yarrick, barely had time to raise his weapon before the shape was gone, swallowed by the shadows. "Did you see that?" Yarrick said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and fear. Quinn's mind raced. That was no animal. No creature they had encountered before could move with such speed, such precision. It was like something engineered to be undetectable, unstoppable. "Stay alert," Quinn ordered, though the words felt weak against the growing fear. "We need to keep moving." But the hunt was no longer about finding the enemy, it was about surviving it. The hunters moved swiftly, but now they were fighting against the weight of uncertainty. Their once powerful tools, their advanced scanners, their weapons, none of it was helping. The enemy was too elusive, and every attempt to engage seemed to bring them closer to a danger they couldn't even see. "Captain," Mara said, her voice shaking slightly, "we're running out of time. We need to figure out what we're up against, or we're all dead." Quinn clenched his jaw, fighting against the rising panic in his chest. He had never failed a mission. But now, with each passing second, it felt as though failure was closing in, lurking just beyond the reach of his senses. And then, as if answering Mara's words, a loud crack split the silence, far off in the distance. The sound of something large breaking through the underbrush. "Move!" Quinn shouted. "Get to higher ground. Now!" They bolted toward a nearby cliffside, hoping the elevation would give them an advantage. But as they reached the base of the cliff, Quinn's heart sank. There was nowhere to climb. The rocks were too smooth, too steep to scale. They were trapped. The hunters had no choice but to form a defensive circle, weapons raised, scanning every direction. The feeling of being surrounded grew unbearable, and the faintest whisper of movement echoed through the trees. "Captain, they're coming," Yarrick said, his voice cracking with fear. "Hold your positions," Quinn ordered, though his voice betrayed his own uncertainty. "We can do this." But deep down, he knew. They were no longer the predators. They were the prey. Just as Quinn began to brace for the inevitable, the ground beneath them trembled slightly, too slight to be a quake, but just enough to make them take notice. The air grew colder still, and the trees seemed to sway, though no wind blew. Then, there was a shift in the atmosphere. An eerie silence descended, even heavier than before, as though the planet itself was holding its breath in anticipation. And then they heard it. A low, guttural sound, coming from the depths of the forest. It wasn't like anything they had ever heard before, neither animal nor machine, but something that seemed both ancient and unfamiliar. Quinn's hand trembled slightly as he held his weapon. He wanted to speak, to reassure his team, but words failed him. The terror that gripped his heart now wasn't just fear, it was a primal instinct, something deep inside him that knew this wasn't just a battle for survival. This was something far worse. The sound grew louder, closer, as the hunters braced themselves for what they couldn't see but knew was coming. Then, in an instant, it all stopped. The sound. The movement. The silence. Nothing. Complete stillness. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. And just as quickly as the tension had risen, it disappeared, replaced by a different kind of terror, the fear of the unknown. The hunters' faces were pale, their breathing shallow. None of them could explain what they had just experienced. What the hell was that? Mara whispered, her voice barely audible. Quinn didn't answer. His mind was elsewhere, trying to piece together the strange, terrifying experience. But one thing was clear, this was no ordinary hunt. This was something else entirely. The stillness around them pressed down with a weight that was almost suffocating. The hunters stood motionless, each of them straining to hear even the slightest sound. Every breath felt too loud, every heartbeat too quick. They were all too aware now, there was something else out there, something they couldn't see, couldn't understand. Quinn felt the cold sweat trickling down his spine, but he refused to break. He couldn't. Not now. Not in front of his team. They were trained to fight the worst the galaxy could throw at them. But this was different. His eyes flicked to Mara, who was gripping her weapon with white knuckles, her breath shallow, her eyes darting around nervously. He could feel the panic creeping up on her, just as it was creeping up on all of them. "We need a plan," Quinn said, his voice steady despite the growing uncertainty gnawing at him. Mara didn't respond immediately, but her gaze flickered towards the dense forest ahead, as if searching for something, anything, that might explain the strange happenings. "We're surrounded," she finally said, her voice quiet but laced with fear. "Whatever it is, it's hunting us." Quinn clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay calm. The hunters weren't used to being hunted. They were the ones who hunted, who killed. But this time, they were the prey. "Keep your heads together," Quinn ordered, though his voice lacked the usual authority. He knew his team could sense his doubt, but he couldn't let that show. "We'll move in teams. We'll set up perimeter scans and wait for the next move." The team nodded, though their faces were grim. It was clear that they were no longer fighting just for survival, they were fighting for understanding. What had they encountered on this planet? What was this silent, invisible enemy? As they began to move cautiously through the dense underbrush, Quinn's thoughts raced. The sounds they had heard earlier were still fresh in his mind. The low, guttural growl. The trembling of the earth. It wasn't just an animal. It was something much more intelligent, something that understood them, understood fear, and used it to its advantage. Then came another sound. A crack, a snap, sharp and precise. It wasn't from the trees. This time, it was closer. Quinn held up his hand to signal for them to stop. His breath caught in his throat. It wasn't just one sound. It was multiple. A chorus of soft noises, like the subtle scratching of claws against bark, the whisper of footsteps that couldn't be seen. Quinn's heart pounded as he scanned the area, his eyes moving over the surroundings, but he could still see nothing. "It's closer now," Yarrick muttered, his voice tight with fear. His fingers gripped his rifle so hard, Quinn feared he might snap it in half. "What's closer?" Mara asked, her voice almost cracking. Quinn didn't answer right away. He knew they could feel it, too, the weight of eyes upon them. It wasn't just the forest. It was the feeling, the sensation that whatever they were facing was everywhere, watching from every corner. The silence of the planet, once eerie, was now oppressive, as if it were a cloak slowly pulling them into its depths. Then it happened. One of the hunters, Lysandra, turned her head sharply to the left, her body tensing. She was looking directly at something, at someone. But Quinn couldn't see it. There was nothing there. Lysandra? Mara whispered, taking a cautious step toward her. Lysandra didn't answer. She was frozen, staring into the trees, her eyes wide with terror. Then, in a motion so swift it almost seemed like a blur, she spun around, her rifle raised, but there was still nothing in her sights. Lysandra, what's going on? Quinn demanded, his voice sharp with concern. They're everywhere, Lysandra breathed. I can feel them, hear them. The words made no sense, but Quinn's gut twisted in knots. He could see it now. The subtle shifts in the shadows. The fleeting glimpses that didn't quite make sense. The whole forest, the entire landscape, seemed to warp in and out of clarity, like a distorted reflection. He stepped forward, his mind racing. Lysandra, we need to stick together. Focus. Can you see them? No, she whispered, her voice trembling. But they can see me. They can see all of us. A ripple of cold swept through Quinn's veins, but he couldn't allow himself to lose control. Not now. His eyes searched the shadows, every muscle tense, waiting for something, anything, to show itself. Suddenly, there was another snap, this time followed by a series of low, rhythmic thuds, as though something was moving through the underbrush at rapid speed, circling them. But it was still too fast, too elusive to catch. They're getting closer, Quinn said, his voice quiet but urgent. We need to move, now. He signaled for the team to move out, and they obeyed, their footsteps quick and deliberate. But no matter how fast they moved, the feeling of being watched never left. It grew heavier with every step, gnawing at their minds, making it harder to focus. Mara was the first to spot it. A flicker. A shadow among shadows. It was subtle, too subtle for anyone else to catch, but it was there. A movement. A figure, barely a shape, standing at the edge of the trees. It was just out of reach, but it was real. Quinn's heart thudded in his chest as he instinctively raised his weapon, but the figure was gone before he could take aim. Did you see it? Mara whispered urgently. There, right there. Quinn turned, but the space was empty again. The air felt too thick, as if something was hiding just beyond the veil of their perception, waiting. Before he could respond, the ground beneath them trembled again, stronger this time. The earth cracked, splintered with a low rumble, and a massive explosion of dust and debris shot up from the earth. The trees groaned in protest as something massive, enormous, emerged from the ground. Quinn's eyes widened in shock as the ground split, revealing a dark, smooth surface beneath, like the surface of some metallic structure buried beneath the earth. It wasn't a natural formation. It was a shelter. A hidden outpost, old but functional, and the thing that had been causing the tremors had emerged from it. The enemy wasn't a creature. It was a machine, a silent, deadly force, waiting, hidden from the hunter's technology in the planet's uncharted depths. And now, it had found them. The ground continued to tremble beneath their feet as the dark, metallic structure slowly began to emerge from the earth. Quinn's heart raced. He had been trained to fight beasts, to track down the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy, but this was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The moment the structure revealed itself, an eerie silence fell. The team stood frozen, their weapons still raised, eyes scanning the area, but nothing moved. The dust from the explosion hung thick in the air, making it difficult to see clearly. They were no longer in the jungle, they were standing at the threshold of something much worse. Quinn's mind raced. What is this place? What is this thing? Stay alert, Quinn ordered, trying to mask the unease in his voice. Weapons up. We move together. The team nodded, but their movements were stiff, almost robotic. They weren't just scared, they were confused. They had expected a wild hunt, not this strange, unknown enemy lurking in the Earth's core. Lysandra, who had been the first to spot the anomaly, spoke, her voice trembling. It's a machine, but it's alive. It's conscious. Quinn looked at her, trying to make sense of her words. How could a machine be alive? And why had it been buried here all this time? Before he could ask, the ground shifted again, and a deep rumbling sound filled the air. The team tensed, eyes darting around, searching for any sign of movement. It wasn't just the earth moving, it was something beneath the surface, something massive. And then, without warning, it came. A massive metal appendage shot up from the ground, its surface gleaming like polished steel. It was a claw, larger than any weapon they had ever seen, and it reached out toward them with terrifying speed. Move! Quinn shouted, his voice filled with urgency as he grabbed Mara and pulled her out of the path of the claw. The rest of the team followed suit, diving for cover behind the nearest trees as the metallic limb slammed into the ground where they had just been standing. The sound of the impact echoed in the air, followed by a high-pitched screech, like metal scraping against metal. The claw retreated back into the ground, only to be replaced by another, smaller one, which slithered toward them like a serpent hunting its prey. Quinn's pulse quickened as the realization hit him. This isn't just an ancient structure. It's a weapon, waiting to be activated. Get to higher ground, he ordered. Now! The team scrambled to obey, climbing up the jagged rocks and trees around them, hoping to find some form of safety from the relentless assault. But the machine wasn't finished. From the heart of the buried structure, a beam of light shot up into the sky, a blinding white pulse that briefly illuminated the entire landscape. The light faded as quickly as it had appeared, but the impact of its power remained. It had been a signal, something had activated. Quinn watched in horror as the ground began to crack open even more, revealing more of the machine's inner workings. Its limbs stretched out, reaching for anything within its grasp. The team was no longer just fighting to survive, they were fighting something that had been dormant for centuries, something that understood their every move before they even made it. We need to find its core, Quinn said, his voice low but urgent. We take out the core, we take it down. Yarrick, who had been observing the machine closely, spoke up, his eyes wide with disbelief. Quinn, this thing's not just a weapon. It's connected to the planet. It is the planet. Quinn turned to face him, confusion written on his face. What do you mean? The tremors, the machine isn't just a piece of technology. It's part of the ecosystem. The plants, the ground, it's all interconnected. Every movement it makes shakes the earth. It's alive. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. The machine wasn't just a tool or a weapon, it was a living organism, and it had been sleeping beneath their feet for centuries. Great, Mara muttered, her voice dripping with sarcasm. We're not fighting a machine. We're fighting an entire planetary defense system. Quinn's jaw tightened. He had no time for jokes now. Focus. We have no choice but to stop it. We can't let it continue. If we do, the whole planet will fall under its control. Lysandra, who had been observing the machine's movements, suddenly stiffened. There's something, someone. It's watching us. Quinn's gaze snapped to hers, his heart skipping a beat. What do you mean? There, she pointed, her fingers shaking as she gestured toward a small clearing. For a moment, Quinn thought she was seeing things, but then he saw it too. A figure. Standing perfectly still, watching them. The figure was humanoid in shape, but there was something strange about it, something otherworldly. It seemed to flicker in and out of visibility, like a shadow crossing the light. "What is that?" Mara whispered. Quinn's instincts screamed at him to move, but he held back, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. He had seen strange things in his years of hunting, but this? This was something new. The figure remained motionless, its face hidden in shadow, but Quinn could feel its gaze, cold, calculating, and completely aware of them. Suddenly, the machine's appendages stopped moving, the ground stilled. The figure stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. It raised one hand, and with a sudden flash of light, everything went dark. Quinn felt a wave of dizziness wash over him as the world around him spun. The last thing he saw before everything went black was the glowing eyes of the figure, burning with an otherworldly intensity. Quinn awoke with a jolt, his head pounding. The world was eerily quiet, the tremors that had been shaking the earth now absent. Slowly, he pushed himself off the ground, his limbs feeling heavy. He could see the dim glow of the jungle around him, but everything was oddly still. The figure, the shadowy figure that had appeared before everything went dark, was gone. The machine, too, had ceased its relentless assault. He glanced around, his breath shallow, his mind racing. What happened? His team was scattered around him, all slowly regaining their bearings. Mara was the first to stand, brushing the dust off her combat suit. "What the hell was that?" she muttered under her breath, her eyes scanning the stillness of the jungle. Quinn looked at her, his heart still racing. "I don't know, but whatever it was, it's not over. Stay sharp." Lysandra stood next, her face pale, eyes wide with disbelief. That thing, it wasn't just a machine. It was alive, like the planet itself. But the figure. I don't think it was human. Yarrick, still crouching on the ground, nodded in agreement. That thing was controlling everything around us. And now it's like it's waiting. It's giving us a chance to make a move, but it's watching us. Every second. Quinn took a deep breath and looked at his team, his mind now fully focused on the mission. They had come to Earth to hunt, to find and eliminate whatever threat the planet had been hiding, but now they were facing something far beyond their expectations. They were no longer the hunters, they were the hunted. "We need to find the core," Quinn said, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling in his mind. "The heart of whatever that machine is. If we destroy it, we might have a chance to take it down. But we don't have much time." Mara nodded, checking the energy reading on her wrist scanner. "The energy signatures, they're coming from the center of the jungle. But the deeper we go, the more unstable the terrain becomes. It's like the planet itself is fighting against us." "We're not just fighting the machine," Lysandra said, her voice tinged with fear. "We're fighting the planet. And whatever's controlling it." Quinn's gaze hardened. They had no choice now. If they didn't act fast, the entire planet would fall under the control of whatever force had awakened. He motioned for the team to move, his mind calculating their next steps. The deeper they ventured into the jungle, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The air grew thick with humidity, the trees towering over them like ancient sentinels. Quinn could feel the weight of the jungle pressing down on them, but what unnerved him the most was the silence. There were no animal sounds, no rustling of leaves in the wind. It was as if the world itself had stopped, waiting for something. As they trudged through the thick underbrush, the ground began to shift again. The once stable earth trembled beneath their boots, and Quinn could feel the vibrations in his bones. Something was coming. "Get ready," Quinn warned. "Stay close." No sooner had he spoken than a massive tremor shook the ground, sending them all stumbling. The trees groaned and cracked, their ancient trunks bending as if the jungle itself was alive, responding to some unseen force. Out of the corner of his eye, Quinn spotted something, a flash of movement, fast and purposeful. His instincts kicked in. Move, he yelled, pushing Mara ahead of him as he drew his weapon. It's back. The team scrambled for cover as the jungle erupted into chaos. Massive metal limbs, like the ones they had seen earlier, shot out from the earth, tearing through the trees with unrelenting force. The air was filled with the sound of splintering wood and the deafening screech of metal scraping against metal. The machine had returned, and it was angrier than ever. But this time, there was something different. The machine seemed aware. It wasn't just attacking randomly, it was targeting them specifically. Quinn's heart raced as he realized the terrifying truth: it knew their every move. Lysandra fired at one of the machine's limbs, but the blast merely ricocheted off the metal surface, causing no more than a minor dent. "It's too strong," she shouted. Quinn cursed under his breath. They needed to find its weak spot, and fast. "Head for the center," he ordered, his voice sharp. "We need to get to the heart of it." The team moved as one, weaving through the chaos, dodging the machine's attacks as they made their way deeper into the jungle. Each step brought them closer to the epicenter of the machine's energy readings. But with every step, the tension grew. The ground shifted beneath them, the earth opening up in new ways, as though the planet itself was fighting to keep them from reaching their goal. Suddenly, Quinn stopped in his tracks. Up ahead, in the distance, he could see something, a massive structure, rising from the earth like a dark monolith. It wasn't just a machine, it was part of the jungle, its roots embedded deep within the soil. The power emanating from it was almost palpable, a low hum that reverberated through the air. "It's the core," Quinn muttered. "This is it." But as he stepped forward, the ground beneath his feet shifted again, this time, more violently. A loud cracking sound filled the air as the earth split open, and from within the chasm, a towering figure emerged. The figure was humanoid in shape but cloaked in shadow, its form shifting like liquid metal. It was the same entity they had seen earlier, the one that had manipulated the machine. The figure raised its arm, and a pulse of energy shot out, hitting Quinn's team and sending them crashing to the ground. Quinn struggled to rise, his vision blurry. The figure's voice, cold and metallic, echoed in his mind. "You should have left. You are not the hunters here. You are the prey." The last thing Quinn saw before everything went black was the glint of the figure's eyes, burning with an intensity that filled him with dread. Quinn's vision slowly cleared, but the world around him was spinning. His body ached from the energy pulse that had sent him crashing into the ground, his limbs feeling as though they were weighed down by an invisible force. The jungle was silent once more, the only sound the faint hum of energy emanating from the towering structure before him. He tried to push himself up, but his strength seemed to fail him. His mind was foggy, disoriented, and for a moment, he wondered if this was it. Had they failed? Had the silent threat finally taken them down? A sharp cough broke through the haze in his head. Quinn turned his head to see Mara, her face streaked with dirt and sweat, struggling to her feet beside him. She was still alive. That was a good sign. "Quinn," she rasped, her voice barely a whisper. Where is everyone else?" Quinn's heart sank as he looked around. Lysandra and Yarrick were nowhere in sight, but he could hear the faint sounds of their labored breathing. They had to be alive. "We need to move. We can't let it finish what it started," Quinn said, pushing through the pain to stand. His hand gripped his weapon tightly, but something was different now. The air felt heavier, as though the entire planet was aware of their presence, waiting for them to make their next move. He turned toward the towering structure, the source of the energy that had sent them into disarray. "The core, it's right there. We destroy it, and we stop this." Mara nodded, her expression grim. "How do we get to it?" "That thing," she motioned toward the humanoid figure, which stood watching them from a distance, still cloaked in shadow, "it's just waiting for us." Quinn stared at the figure, his mind racing. The entity had been waiting, watching, every step of the way. It had allowed them to come this far, but now, they were approaching its heart. And it knew exactly what they intended to do. Suddenly, a deep rumble shook the earth again, far stronger than before. The jungle seemed to shudder as the very ground beneath them quaked. Quinn could feel it, this was it. The final act. The planet, the machine, the entity, it was all converging into this moment. Move! Quinn shouted, rushing toward the structure, with Mara at his heels. The path to the core was treacherous, the ground shifting beneath them with every step. The trees seemed to bend inward, their massive roots shifting to block their path, as though the jungle itself was trying to keep them from reaching their goal. Quinn gritted his teeth, pushing forward, aware of the figure's eyes on them, but determined to press on. They reached the base of the massive structure, its roots tangled in the earth, pulsing with dark energy. Quinn could feel the hum of the machine beneath his feet, and he knew that with every second they delayed, the power of the machine grew stronger. They had no time left. Stay close, Quinn warned, as they approached a large opening in the side of the structure. Inside, the walls were lined with pulsating veins of light, the energy feeding into the heart of the machine. But just as they were about to enter, the ground cracked open beneath them, and the shadowy figure appeared, blocking their way. The air crackled with energy as the figure extended its arm toward them, the metallic surface shimmering with deadly intent. "You do not belong here," the figure's voice boomed in Quinn's mind, a cold, merciless echo that seemed to shake his very core. "You were never meant to stand against me." Quinn's grip on his weapon tightened, his jaw clenched. "We were meant to stop you. You and this planet. Whatever you are, you're not in control anymore." The figure's eyes flashed, and the ground trembled once more. The air became charged, crackling with raw energy as the figure lunged forward, its body moving with an unnatural fluidity, faster than Quinn could react. Before he could raise his weapon, a blast of energy shot toward him, sending him flying backward into the dirt. "Quinn!" Mara screamed, rushing to his side, but the figure wasn't done. With a swift motion, it turned toward her, sending a surge of energy straight at her. But before the blast could reach her, a sudden shot rang out, striking the figure's shoulder. It staggered back, disoriented, as Lysandra and Yarrick appeared from behind a cluster of trees. They had survived. "Don't think you've won," Lysandra said, her voice sharp as she leveled her weapon at the figure. "We've been fighting you this entire time. You won't win now." The figure paused, its gaze flickering between them, its form wavering as though it was made of smoke. Then, in a voice that seemed to reverberate through the very earth, it spoke. "You think you have control? You are but ants. The planet, the machine, it's all part of me. And when I finish with you, nothing will remain." Quinn, despite his injuries, rose to his feet, determined. The entity's arrogance was its greatest weakness. It believed it was invincible, but it was wrong. They still had a chance. "We may be ants," Quinn said, his voice steady. "But ants can topple giants." In one swift motion, Quinn charged forward, Mara by his side, as Lysandra and Yarrick created a distraction. They sprinted toward the opening in the structure, the hum of the machine growing louder with every step. The figure's rage-filled screech echoed behind them, but they didn't stop. They reached the core. The massive, pulsating energy center hummed with an almost sentient presence. The walls around them trembled, the entire structure vibrating as though it were alive. It was now or never. "Take the shot," Quinn urged, as Mara aimed her weapon at the heart of the core. She fired. The explosion was deafening, a surge of energy that sent shockwaves through the jungle. The entire structure crumbled, its once unyielding walls collapsing in on themselves. The figure screamed, but it was too late. The machine's power faltered, and with it, the grip the planet had over them loosened. The jungle was eerily quiet once more. The figure was gone, the structure destroyed. Quinn stood amidst the wreckage, his body battered but alive. The silence now felt different, peaceful, almost as if the planet itself was breathing a sigh of relief. His team stood with him, battered but victorious. They had faced the unknown, battled against a force greater than themselves, and emerged stronger for it. The silent threat had been taken down. Quinn looked around at his team, a tired but resolute smile on his face. We did it. Humanity did it. The lesson was clear: no matter how insurmountable the odds seemed, the strength of human resolve, the courage to fight even when all hope seemed lost, could overcome the most unimaginable challenges. And that was what made humanity truly unstoppable. The aftermath of the battle left the team standing amidst the ruins of the once powerful structure. The air felt different now, lighter, as though the oppressive weight of the silent threat had finally been lifted from the planet. It was as if the jungle itself had let out a collective breath, its energy now calm and still. The machines that had once pulsed with life were silent, and the eerie hum that had filled the air was gone. Quinn, bloodied and bruised, stood in the center of the wreckage, his hand gripping the remains of his weapon. His heart pounded in his chest, but it was no longer from fear. Now it was from the realization that the battle was finally over. The silent threat had been taken down. The machine, the entity, it was all destroyed. They had done the impossible. But as Quinn's gaze swept across the group, Mara, Lysandra, and Yarrick, all standing tall despite the toll the battle had taken on them, he couldn't shake the feeling that the journey had not just been about defeating an enemy. It had been about discovering something deeper within themselves, something more powerful than any weapon or technology. Mara was the first to speak, breaking the silence. Her voice was quieter now, a soft echo of the strength she had shown during their fight. What now? It's over, right? Quinn nodded slowly, taking a deep breath. Yes. It's over. But it's not just the planet that's been freed, it's us. We've proven something to ourselves. Lysandra stepped forward, wiping dirt from her face. Her eyes were heavy, filled with exhaustion, but there was a spark there, too. We've seen what we're capable of. Together, we've overcome something none of us could have done alone. Yarrick, who had been silent up until now, turned his head toward the ruins of the fallen structure. His expression was thoughtful, almost pained. It wasn't just about defeating them, was it? It was about understanding the true power we have, the strength that comes from within. Quinn's eyes locked onto Jarrek's, and for a moment, it felt as though time itself had stopped. The weight of their journey, the trials they had endured, all of it had been leading to this one realization. They hadn't just fought an enemy, they had fought their own doubts, their fears, and they had come out the other side stronger for it. The enemy was never just the machine, Quinn said softly, his voice filled with conviction. It was the belief that we were powerless, that we couldn't change anything. That we couldn't defeat something as ancient and powerful as this. But we did. And that's what makes us stronger.